Welcome back to What Is, where we dive deep into the mysteries, the histories, and the absolute how on earth did they survive that moments of human existence. Today we're looking at a period of history so grim, so catastrophic, and so shockingly weird that it literally broke the world and put it back together in a completely different shape. I'm talking, of course, about the Black Death. But what actually was it? Where did it come from? Was it really caused by people being mean to cats? And how did a single germ manage to destroy the entire social structure of Europe? Grab your lavender-scented masks and stay 6 feet apart, metaphorically speaking, as we ask, what is the Black Death and how did it change Europe? To understand the Black Death, first we have to meet our guest of honor, Yersinia pestis. Now, if you saw Yersinia pestis under a microscope, you wouldn't be intimidated. It looks like a tiny, harmless jelly bean. But this jelly bean is actually one of the most efficient killing machines in biological history. It's the bacterium responsible for the plague. The plague isn't just one thing though, it's a triple threat. First you've got the bubonic plague. This is the most famous version. It attacks the lymphatic system. You get these massive, painful swellings called buboes in your groin, armpits, and neck. They turn black, they ooze, and they smell, to put it mildly, like something that has been dead for 3 weeks in a dumpster. Lovely. Then there's septicemic plague. This happens when the bacteria skip the lymph nodes and go straight into the bloodstream. This is where your skin starts to turn black and die while you're still using it, hence the name, the Black Death. And finally, there's the pneumonic plague. This is the one that really gets the efficient killer award. It infects the lungs. Once it's there, you aren't just sick, you're a walking biohazard. Every cough or sneeze sends millions of bacteria into the air. If you caught this version in 1348, you had a survival rate of approximately 0%. You'd be dead in 24 hours. But where did this microscopic nightmare come from? It wasn't just a random curse from the heavens, though people certainly thought so at the time. The plague is primarily a disease of rodents, specifically marmots and ground squirrels in Central Asia. Usually, the bacteria stays in those wild colonies, but occasionally it jumps to the black rat, and the black rat is a world-class traveler. It loves humans. It loves our houses, our barns, and specifically our ships. But rats aren't the ones actually biting us. The real culprit is the flea. A flea bites an infected rat, sucks up a bellyful of Yersinia pestis, and the bacteria actually blocks the flea's stomach. The flea becomes ravenously hungry because it can't digest anything, so it starts to bite everything in sight, including humans, and then it vomits the bacteria into the bite wound. It's gross, it's efficient, and in the 1300s, it was unstoppable. Now before we get to the big one, the pandemic that everyone knows, we have to talk about the prequel. Because the Black Death wasn't the first time Yersinia pestis tried to end the world. In the 6th century, the Byzantine Empire was doing pretty well. Emperor Justinian was on the verge of reuniting the old Roman Empire. He was winning wars, building the Hagia Sophia, and feeling pretty good about himself. And then in 541 AD, the plague of Justinian arrived. It hit Constantinople like a freight train. At its peak, it was killing 5,000 people a day in the city alone. Justinian himself caught it, but managed to survive. His empire, however, was not so lucky. The death toll was so high, there weren't enough people to harvest crops or man the armies. The economy collapsed, the borders crumbled. The dream of a restored Rome died right then and there. History has funny ways of repeating itself, but the 14th century version of the plague was going to make Justinian's experience look like a mild cold. Fast forward to the 1340s, the world was more connected than ever before thanks to the Silk Road. Trade was booming. spices, silks, and ideas were moving from China to Europe. Unfortunately, the rats were hitching a ride for free. The official start of the Black Death's European tour is often cited as the Siege of Caffa in 1346. Caffa was a lucky trading port on the Crimean Peninsula, run by the Genoese. It was besieged by a Mongol army, but the Mongols started dying of the plague. Now, usually when your army starts melting from the inside out, you pack up and go home, but the Mongol commander had a parting gift. He used his catapults to fling the plague-infested corpses of his soldiers over the city walls. This is arguably the first recorded instance of biological warfare. The Genoese merchants inside the city panicked, jumped on their ships, and sailed for Italy. They brought their silk, their spices, and a hold full of infected rats and fleas. By 1347, the ship docked in Sicily. The people on the docks found most of the crew dead or dying, covered in black boils. They tried to send the ships away, but it was too late. The guest had arrived. From Sicily, the plague moved like wildfire. It hit Messina, then Genoa, then Venice. By 1348, it was in Paris. By 1349, it was in London. And by 1350, it had reached Scandinavia and Russia. To give you an idea of the scale, imagine the population of the United States today. Now imagine if in the next 3 years, 150 million people just disappeared. That was Europe. In 5 years, the Black Death killed between 30 and 60% of the entire population. Some towns were completely wiped out. In others, there weren't enough living people to bury the dead. Now, if you were living in 1348, you had no idea what bacterium was. You didn't know about fleas. You didn't understand about Yersinia pestis. So how did people explain half their neighbors suddenly turning purple and dying? The most common theory was miasma, basically the idea that the air was corrupt or bad. People thought that if you smelled something rotting, you'd catch the plague. This is why medieval doctors wore those terrifying bird masks later on. Though the famous leather suits actually came a couple of centuries later, the idea was the same. Fill the beak with flowers and herbs to filter out the bad air. Other people blamed the alignment of the planets. Some blamed literal poison fog rolling in from the east. And of course, many believed it was the wrath of God. This led to some of the most bizarre and tragic responses in history. You had the flagellants, groups of people who travelled from town to town, whipping themselves with leather straps to show God how sorry they were for their sins, hoping he'd call off the plague. Spoiler, it didn't work. In fact, by travelling from town to town and gathering large, bleeding crowds, they actually helped spread the disease faster. Then there was the scapegoating. When people are scared and dying, they look for someone to blame. This led to horrific massacres of Jewish communities across Europe, who were falsely accused of poisoning wells. It was a dark time for humanity in every possible sense. But here's where the story gets really weird. Let's talk about the cats. There's a long-standing historical theory that the plague was made much, much worse because of a specific edict from the Pope. In the 1230s, about 100 years before the Black Death hit, Pope Gregory IX issued a document called the Vox in Rama. In this document, he basically declared that black cats were instruments of Satan. Now, medieval people took the Pope very seriously. If the Pope says cats are evil, you don't just stop petting them, you get rid of them. Mass cat culls occurred across Europe. Now let's do some basic ecological math. What happens when you remove the primary predator of the rat? You get a rat population explosion. By the time 1347 rolled around, Europe was basically a giant all-you-can-eat buffet for rats. They were in the thatch of roofs, they were in the grain stores, they were in the beds. If the cat population had been healthy, would the plague have spread as fast? Probably not. We literally killed the one thing that could have hunted the carriers of our destruction. It's one of history's greatest oops moments. So the plague has killed half of Europe. The streets are empty, the fields are overgrown. You think this would be the end of civilization, right? Actually, for the survivors, life was about to get a whole lot better. Before the plague, Europe operated on a system called feudalism. At the top, you had the king and the lords. At the bottom, you had the serfs. Serfs were basically tied to the land. They worked for the lord, they had no rights, and they were paid next to nothing because there were so many of them. Labor was cheap, people were expendable. But then, the plague killed half the labor force. Suddenly, the lords had a massive problem. Their crops were rotting in the fields because there was no one to harvest them. They looked around for workers, but there were none left. The surviving peasants realized they were suddenly very, very valuable. For the first time in history, they had leverage. Peasants started saying to their lords, "Oh, you want me to plow that field? That's great. But instead of working for free, I want actual wages, and I want to be able to leave this land if I want to. And if you don't like it, the lord in the next village over is offering double what you are." The lords were furious. They tried to pass laws, like the Statute of Labourers in England, which basically told peasants they weren't allowed to ask for more money. But you can't legislate against supply and demand. Feudalism collapsed. The middle class began to emerge. Standard of living for the average person actually went up. People were eating better meat, wearing better clothes, and moving into better houses because there was a surplus of everything and fewer people to use it. It's a grim irony. The Black Death was the best thing to ever happen to the European working class. The plague didn't change the economy, it changed the human psyche. Before the Black Death, the church was the absolute authority. But the plague didn't care if you were a holy priest or a sinful thief. It killed bishops as easily as it killed beggars. When the priests couldn't explain why this was happening, or worse, when they ran away to save themselves, people started questioning the institution. This led to a new kind of individual spirituality that would eventually pave the way for the Protestant Reformation. Art and culture changed too. Have you ever seen those medieval paintings of skeletons dancing with kings and peasants? That's called the Danse Macabre, the dance of death. The message was simple. Death is the great equalizer. It doesn't matter how much money you have, the skeleton is coming for you too. This obsession with mortality actually led to a live for today attitude. It fueled a curiosity about the human body and the natural world. If the old ways of thinking couldn't save us from the plague, maybe we needed new ways of thinking. Many historians argue that the Black Death was the reset button that ended the Middle Ages and cleared the path for the Renaissance. By shaking the foundations of society so violently, it allowed for something new to grow in the ruins. So where is the plague now? Did we defeat it? Well, yes and no. We didn't defeat it in the sense that it's gone. Yersinia pestis is still out there. It lives in prairie dogs in the American Southwest and in rodent populations in Madagascar and Mongolia. Every year, a few thousand people still catch the plague. But here's the difference. We have antibiotics. If you catch the bubonic plague today, you don't need a bird mask or a bunch of lavender. You just need a course of streptomycin or tetracycline. What used to be an apocalyptic death sentence is now a treatable bacterial infection. The Black Death was a turning point in the story of humanity. It showed us how vulnerable we are to the microscopic world. It showed us how quickly our social structures can crumble. But it also showed us our resilience. From the ashes of the 14th century came the more mobile, more balanced, and more inquisitive Europe. We learned about quarantine, venturing the word quarantina from the Italian 40 days, which is how long ships had to wait off the coast of Venice to ensure they weren't carrying the disease. We learned about public health, and we eventually learned that maybe, just maybe, we should keep the cats around. The Black Death was a horror story, but it was also a birth pang. It was the moment the medieval world ended and the modern world began to stir. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the darker side of history. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the what is of the Black Death, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring these stories to life. Let us know in the comments, what is the most surprising thing you learned today? Was it the catapulting corpses, the Pope's war on cats, or the fact that the plague is still hanging out with prairie dogs in Arizona? Don't forget to click the bell icon so you never miss a video. Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and for goodness sake, wash your hands. See you next time.